ॐ नमो नारायणाय ॐ नमो नारायणाय
Asmad Gurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Paramagurubhyo Namaha, Asmad Sarva Gurubhyo Namaha. So we continue with part 2 of the Vedanta by V.S. Gate. And I think we're still in the introduction, so let's go straight to the text. So we finished, the last sentence that we finished was here. He was talking about the Saddarshanas and the intervening stages between the Vedas and the Upanishads on the one hand, and the sutras on the other hand, meaning Vedanta sutras, because there was a whole sutra period, so there are different sutras, but here we're talking about Vedanta sutras, is represented by the philosophical portions in the Mahabharata, as for instance, the Bhagavad Gita, right? The Sanat Sujatiya Parvan, the Moksha Dharma, etc., portions of which have formed the common basis of Buddhism and Sankhya, which, however, as far from contained a systematic doctrine as the Upanishads themselves. And terms like Sankhya and Yoga, which are names of the schools of two of the Saddarshanas, the six darshanas, main philosophical schools of Indian thought, frequently to be met with there, do not signify the names of the latter systems called by those names. So what he's trying to say is that in the Mahabharata, when you come across the term Sankhya and Yoga, they don't necessarily equate exactly to the Sankhya and Yoga that we know of as those specific schools in the six schools, in the six heterodox Orthodox schools, but merely mean reflection and concentration, in which sense they are used as when they first occur in Svetashvatara Upanishad 6.13. Okay, so all of that, we would have to go look at Svetashvatara 6.13, and he's saying that after reading the Upanishads and comparing the terminology and jargon in the Upanishads with that coming in the Mahabharata, and then how it comes later in the understanding of people who have analyzed and defined the six darshanas, the six orthodox schools. So now he's going to talk about the heterodox schools. So we have what's called the orthodox schools and the heterodox schools, the Saddarshanas, Yoga, Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva, and Uttara Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa being Vedanta. These are the six what we call orthodox schools, because they all accept the Vedas as being pramana, or being proof, as being authentic and source of right knowledge, whereas the heterodox schools reject the Vedas. And so the heterodox schools are like Charvaka, which is the Indian atheistic system, also called Lokayatika, and Buddhism and Jainism, let's say. Anyway, so we have as for what distinguishes the orthodox from the heterodox or Nastika schools. So orthodox and heterodox in Sanskrit is usually translated as Astika and Nastika. So sometimes people say Nastika. If you say Nastika in Hindi, or Nastika tends to be translated as atheistic, but actually Nastika doesn't really mean atheistic. Astika and Nastika simply refer to whether people accept the Vedas or don't accept the Vedas, Astika or Nastika. So so what distinguishes the orthodox from the heterodox schools? It is generally believed to be the want of belief in God as a creator of the world. And in this sense, the beginnings of Indian atheism can be traced back to the Vedic period even. In the Rig Veda, the god Indra is derided in 4:24:10, in 10:119, and in 2:12:5, also in 8:100-103. We read of people who absolutely denied his existence even in these early days. We have here the first traces of the naive atheism, which is so far from indulging in any philosophic reflection that it simply refuses to believe what it cannot visualize, right? And which was later known as Charvaka or Lokayatika system. So Charvaka, the thing about that distinguishes Charvaka from other systems is his understanding of what's called pramanas, or methods of attaining true knowledge. Charvaka is famous for only accepting pratyaksha. Pratyaksha means straight sense perception or direct sense perception. So there are many arguments against this, logical arguments against only accepting direct sense perception, because direct sense perception, as we know, can be faulty. The example given, the classical example given in the scriptures, is that there's a hill, or there's a mountain, and there's fire on the mountain. So we see smoke. In fact, we just experienced, we're on a mountain which just has a fire on it right now, and we experience that smoke. And where there's smoke, there's fire. So when usually when people, so if somebody experiences the smoke, they realize that they have to run away because there's a fire, like that. Because the smoke, that even if they don't see the fire. At the same time, it could be that the fire has been extinguished and there's still smoke. So just to smell smoke or see smoke doesn't mean that there is active fire. So sense perception is faulty. And similarly, what appears to be like smoke, a cloud on a mountain, may just simply indicate some other sort of weather pattern and not actual fire. So since this is a classical example given, that to understand that seeing is not always believing, or direct sense perception doesn't always give us true knowledge. Another very simple experiment that people do, I remember in school in science class, what we used to do is there at one point, very simple experiment, you have three vessels of water. You have hot water, you have cold water, and then you have room temperature water. So if you put your hand in the hot water, after some time, if you take it out and put it in the room temperature water, it feels cool. However, if you put your hand in the cool water, right, and then move it to the room temperature water, it feels hot. So is the room temperature water hot or cold? It's not either hot or cold, because heat, this is just to explain to you that heat and cold, the sensation of heat and cold is not objectively, it's not objectively understood. It's understood in comparison to something else. So a person from a very cold climate, he may go to a temperate climate, which is a little warmer than his, and he may feel very hot. But a person from a tropical climate, a very hot climate, may go to a temperate climate and feel cold. So in that case, the knowledge of whether something is hot or cold is not absolute. It's relative. It's relative to, so it's relative knowledge, right? So Charvaka, there was another example of how to defeat the Charvaka idea that we can only understand true knowledge from sense perception, direct sense perception, and that is the example is given that there was a man who was married, and he goes on a trip and he comes back after 1 year. When he comes back after 1 year, his wife is pregnant. So if he is a Charvaka, then he has no direct experience of how she became pregnant. He doesn't know how she could become pregnant. However, if he uses also logical inference, he can understand that since pregnancy takes, some time, to occur, like that, if he's been away for a year, like that, obviously, if the woman wasn't pregnant before he left, otherwise she would have already had the baby. So like that, so she must have been impregnated by some other person. So while he was away. So but he can't know that by direct perception. He can only know that by logical inference. So this is one of the reasons when we talk about pramanas or epistemology, methods of attaining true knowledge, we have to accept not just direct sense perception, but we also have to accept logical inference, or logical inference or logic to understand. Even though we don't directly perceive something, we can understand it to be true by logic. Okay, so we have the first traces of this naive atheism, which is so far from indulging in any philosophic reflection, it simply refuses to believe that it cannot visualize, right? So these people are rejecting Indra. So apparently in the Veda, there's some people who say, well, they reject Indra because they can't see Indra. So we could say that, we could say that about anybody, if why should I believe that there's a king of England? I've never met him. I've never seen him. So why should I believe that there's a king of England? Well, of course, nowadays we have other methods of indirect perception. We can see a photograph, or we can see a television program or some film about him, and we can infer that if we accept that this is correct, right? However, we can see films today of imaginary things. So just because we go to see a film about some other planet or some other thing doesn't mean that that is real knowledge. So sense perception, even inference, logical inference, these can be faulty, of course, but still the idea, this Charvaka system of this Charvaka system, which only believes in sense perception, is extremely faulty. So as distinguished from it, there is the philosophical atheism of the Bodhas. He says Buddhas, it means Buddhists, and Jainas, followers of Jain religion, according to whom there is no eternal supreme God, creator, or Lord of all things, and the so-called gods are only more highly organized and happier beings than men. An atheism which can go hand in hand with a religious system and cannot prevent it from being one of the most influential religions of the world. So Buddhism and Jainism, Jainism not so much, but these days, but Buddhism is quite an influential religion in the world. And there are many people, but it's based on this idea that there is no, we can say there is no supreme person. Okay, so, but if the distinction be merely to the negation of God, even the Sankhya would cease to be orthodox. Now, in Sankhya, right, which is, Sankhya basically in Sanskrit means counting, or it means enumerating, right? So it's people who have sat down and who have enumerated the different elements, and they've come to an idea, a theory of how the elements, the creation came about. And actually this Sankhya theory of creation and the different elements is accepted in Vaishnavism. And so, but even Sankhya will cease to be orthodox. So there are two actual sections to Sankhya. There's a school called Nirishvara Sankhya, and there's Sarishvara Sankhya. So Ishvara means God. So Sa Ishvara means with God, and Nirishvara means without God. So there's a school of Sankhya that believes that the world just came about without any help from a creator. And there's another that's called the Nirishvara Sankhya. And then there's another school which believes that the world came about and was created in a certain way, but it took God to get that, to start that to happen, to get the ball rolling. So even Sankhya, even the school of Sankhya, doesn't actually need God. So there is a form called Nirishvara Sankhya, which doesn't have God play a part in it. The Mimamsakas of the school of Kumarila Bhatta also allow for deny the existence of a supreme God. Okay, so Kumarila Bhatta, was famously defeated the Buddhists. He he actually became a disciple of a Buddhist master and learned all the secrets of the Buddhist and defeated the Buddhists. Afterwards, he committed suicide because he believed in karma. So the Mimamsakas, they believe in karma. There many times that school is called karma mimamsa. It's also called purva mimamsa, because mimamsa means simply a full discussion of something, right? So there's the full discussion about the works of karma, and there's a full discussion of the works of jnana and upasana, or knowledge and worship, which come later, which is Vedanta. So there's Purva and Uttara. Uttara means afterwards. Purva means before. Mimamsa. So there's two deliberations about the Vedas, about the Vedas and the Upanishads. The parts of the Vedas which deal with philosophical things are the subject of the Uttara Mimamsa school, or the Vedanta school, and the other parts of the Vedas have to do with karma kanda, or rituals that are performed to elevate the personality, maybe in this life or in the next life, to different social positions and spiritual, semi-spiritual positions, to type of heaven, which is not Vaikuntha, not a place of eternal happiness, but a place of temporary happiness, like that. So Kumarila Bhatta was a great master of that. He was later on his disciple, Sankara Mishra. I forget his name. One of his disciples met Adi Shankaracharya and was defeated by Adi Shankaracharya and became a disciple of Adi Shankaracharya. So there's a progression here from the Buddhists to the Karmakandis to the Vedantists, like that. So, but even in the system of Karmakanda, Kumarila Bhatta denies the existence of a supreme God. They may even, the Karmakandis, they may even believe in different demigods, but they don't believe in that they're supreme, or that they're even necessary for us to get the result from performing the particular Vedic ritual or sacrifice, which is what their discussions are all about. Attaining some benefit in this life or in the next life for ourselves by performing Vedic rituals. So even in the Vaisheshika and Nyaya systems, which are also the two other systems so we talked about Yoga and Sankhya, we talked about Nyaya and we talked about Purva and Uttara Mimamsa, Karmakanda and Vedanta. And but now there's two others, Vaisheshika and Nyaya systems. Nyaya means logic. Vaisheshika is another system, which is not talked about that much. The theistic element, far from being a fundamental point of doctrine, is nothing but a mere appendage. So really, it's not really there. Even in the Nyaya systems, we don't talk about God, and Vaisheshika, we don't talk about God so much, the supreme God. So Buddhism and Jainism, moreover, and remember we're talking about heterodox schools here, otherwise sort of equivalent to atheistic schools. Buddhism and Jainism, moreover, though they deny God or a supreme God, raise the personalities of Buddha and Jina almost to the eminence of a god, as a teacher of the sacred lore and as the object of high reverence, while admitting, no doubt, that the world is without beginning or end and not produced by any god or ruled by one. So it is the want of faith in the Vedas as revelation and as the highest authority of pramanya buddhir vedeshu, right? So vedeshu is plural. Of the Vedas, the wisdom of the Vedas is pramana, is proof, right? So it's pramanya buddhir vedeshu, that's what it means, which from the Brahmanical point of view place the so-called atheistic schools out of the pale of orthodoxy. Thus Sankhya, the Vaisheshika and the Mimamsa can call themselves orthodox and not unatheistic, because they accepted the authority of the Vedas in theory. However little they might use it in practice, at least they do not condemn it as did the Buddhists and the Jains. Okay, so that's just, he's trying to explain that in the six orthodox systems which accept the Vedas, right, there isn't, in some of those systems, there's not a lot of discussion of God or a supreme God. However, because they're called orthodox because they accept the Vedas, and that's the point that we were trying to make. Of the 6 orthodox systems that developed during the third period of Sankhya and the Vedanta, during this third period, the Sankhya and the Vedanta are the only ones strictly of metaphysical importance. And as we said, the Vedanta accepts the system of creation laid out in Sankhya. It is the Vedanta alone that has appropriated itself as Upanishada doctrine, that is, dealing with what's given in the Upanishads, since it's the only system which seriously concerns itself with explaining and reconciling the various divergent metaphysical portions of the Upanishads, and since it alone regards the Upanishads as the highest authority, not only in theory, but in practice. So a question was, would it mean rejecting any scripture or elements of it which is not tangible?
That was a question regarding the atheistic systems, which were, I think, a few paragraphs above.
Yeah, above, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that that these heterodox systems, they reject not only the Vedas, but they reject other scriptures as well. They have their own scriptures, Buddhists and Jains. Anyway, it's absolutely okay. So, all right. So where were we? Divergent metaphysical portions of the Upanishads, which not only in theory but in practice, right? They're following the system of the given in the Upanishads. The metaphysical importance and the ancient character of the Sankhya is proved by the fact that the Vedanta Sutras take special pains to refute it, right? So in the Vedanta Sutras, there is some refutation of Sankhya school. However, like we said, because the Sankhya system of the idea in Sankhya of the different elements and the creation is accepted, not everything in Sankhya is thrown out, right? But the idea that there is no God, right, or no supreme person who creates the world, right, that is rejected. That part of it is rejected. So Nirishvara Sankhya is rejected. Sankhya without God. Sa Ishvara Sankhya is accepted. Sankhya that accepts God. So Sankhya is proved by the fact that Vedanta Sutras take special pains to refute the system of Sankhya, meaning the system of Nirishvara Sankhya. The other systems, with only a nominal metaphysical grounding, have specialized in other departments of knowledge, and thus are of still greater importance for philosophy proper. Thus, the yoga, which is a sequel to Sankhya, and which accepts the metaphysical doctrine of Sankhya entirely, with the only difference that it regards the Ishvara as more important, that God is more important personality than the Sankhya does, mainly concerns itself with the theory and practice of samadhi. So samadhi is, or concentration of mind, and various physical and mental gymnastics related to it, of course, viewed as means of arriving at the knowledge of the essence of things, and in other words, at the vision of the highest verity, the highest truth. So this word samadhi comes from the eightfold path of yoga, which is propounded by Patanjali. So Astanga yoga, Asta Anga, 8 parts. So the Vaisheshika, it's the eighth part. So starting with asana, pranayama, dhyana, all these different asana, seat, breath control, different, so different sitting positions, breath control, meditation, coming up to full concentration on the Supreme in the final step called samadhi. The Vaisheshika dealing with the categories of substance and quality, action, commonness, particularity, invariable concomitance, to which was later added non-existence, negation. So in the Vaisheshika system, they talk about all these different aspects or qualities. So we have substance, we have quality, we have action, we have commonness, particularity, invariable concomitance, right? But then also people started thinking about it, and they started to think, well, if we're going to talk about existence, things which exist, we have to also add another category for things that don't exist. So non-existence or negation was also added as another category. So Vaisheshika is dealing with these different categories. Elaborates the doctrine of atoms, that everything's made out of material atoms, and that of particularity or vishesha. Vishesha means speciality or particularity, from which it derives its name. Symmetry and consistency of division and precision of thought and expression characterize this school, and they were further carried to perfection and emphasized in its sequel, Nyaya. So it's very interesting here, having studied these different schools of these Orthodox schools, what he's doing is he's trying to lay out a chronological progression of the different schools of thought, even amongst the Orthodox schools. So that we have Sankhya, and then we have yoga, and then we have Vaisheshika, and then further we have Nyaya, meaning logic. So emphasized it by its sequel, the Nyaya, which concerned itself solely with logic and the theory and art of valid reasoning. And this is, even when we look at pramanas, when we look at the epistemology of a particular school, usually we talk about the epistemology. We first of all talk about direct perception, and then we talk about logical inference or logic or argument. And so, understanding by discussion or argument something. So that's a typical progression. And so what he's saying here is that the Sankhya, the yoga, and the Vaisheshika schools all dealt with basically pratyaksha, and then Nyaya came along, which is dealing with anumana or logical inference. So a sequel to Nyaya, which concerned itself solely with logic and the theory of and art of valid reasoning. Thus, Nyaya, or syllogism, was its special occupation, and consequently, in the place of the 6 or 7 objective categories of Vaisheshika. So Vaisheshika had these categories, which we just talked about, which were concerned more with the products of thought. The Nyaya had 16 logical categories, which referred to the modes of thought and the thoughts themselves, and which are mainly related to controversial discussion or disputation. So necessary, disputation is so necessary for the ascertainment of truth. So they are, and now he's going to talk about these 16 logical categories in the Nyaya school. Now, even the Nyaya school, like the Sankhya school, is divided into 2 parts. There is the original Navya. There is an original Nyaya, Gautama's original Nyaya, and then which he laid out in sutras, and then we also have what's called the Navya Nyaya school. The Navya Nyaya school became very popular. Navya just simply means a new Nyaya, new logic. So this is the original logic, and then they added there was another school that revived it and was added some additions to it like that. And Navadvip in West Bengal was a great seat of Navya Nyaya. So They are okay. So here's these different logical categories: proof, pramana; object of knowledge, prameya; doubt, samshaya; purpose, prayojana; instance, drishtanta; demonstrated truth, siddhanta; member of a syllogism, which means a series of arguments giving doubt, and then a proposal, and then a wrong understanding and a right understanding. Finally, avayava, reasoning by deduction of absurdity, tarka, which simply means wrangling or argumentation or discussion, right? Determination or ascertainment, nirnaya; discussion leading to truth, vada; wrangling, jalpa; cavilling, vitanda; fallacy, hetva bhasa; perversion, chala; futility, jati; and unfitness to be argued with, nigrahasthana. Okay, so these are the different categories like that. So there's a question here. Pure epistemological bliss, yes. Okay, so these are the different categories in Nyaya. It'd be interesting to go into Nyaya a little bit. I haven't really done that. We could do that. We could look at some more about Nyaya. But anyway, he's explained it here. He's giving a sort of synopsis. The Purva Mimamsa, remember the Karma Kandas, Kumrila Bhatta, etc., right? More generally called Mimamsa only, right? Has for its special object the interpretation of the Vedas, or the determination of the sense of the revelation, and its whole scope in the ascertainment of duty or dharma, which signifies the sacrifices and other acts of religion ordained in the Vedas. Thus, so he's now showing how from Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, then Vaisheshika, then Nyaya, he's coming to Purva Mimamsa, how Purva Mimamsa uses all those things, especially Nyaya or logic, in its discussions of what is the real duty to be understood in the Vedas, and what we should do. So thus it is practical. Yes, Nyaya will be very interesting. Yes. So thus it is practical as relating to works, karma, or religious observances to be undertaken for specific ends, and it is accordingly called karma mimamsa, right? In contradiction to the Brahma meaning Brahman, the supreme, right? Brahma Mimamsa, which is theological. Thus, this Mimamsa is not a philosophical system in a proper sense of the word, right? So because it deals with karma Mimamsa, it deals with the actions in this life and for the next life of the different Vedic sacrifices. It touches on philosophical topics only incidentally, and in the course of delivering canons of scriptural interpretation. As regards the metaphysical part, the 5 systems, that is Sankhya, and he would we should put it in his order. He's giving it a chronological order: Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Purva Mimamsa, may be distinguished from the 6th, which is what we're going to talk about. The whole subject of this book is the Vedanta, which is the 6th school, right? The Uttamimamsa or Vedanta, by the fact that the former take their stand on duality, while the latter on unity, excepting, of course, the particular school of Vedanta represented by Madhva. And so Madhva is a bit of an outlier here, because he doesn't believe in unity in philosophical, theological terms, except he believes the only thing he believes in unity is between the different avatars, the different forms of Lord Vishnu. But apart from that, he believes that everything is separate. There's There's difference or distinction on all levels. Okay, so as a matter of fact, so here we have these five systems, once again chronologically: Sankhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Nyaya, Purvamamsa, which all deal with duality. They all deal with duality because they're all about the different elements and the creation and so on, and then categorizing those things in yoga and Vaisheshika, and then using those things to interpret the Vedas in Nyaya, and then using that in Purvamamsa to understand the karmas that we have to do, the duty that we have to do in life, and how the different Vedic sacrifices are performed. So these all deal with this world of duality, whereas the Upanishads deal with a system that has at least an underlying unity. For Shankara, of course, it's a complete unity, a total unity, because he's all in for unity, and he doesn't believe in duality at all, except on some lower level of understanding. But not in the paramartika sense. In the vyavaharika sense, he only believes in duality, whereas the other Vedantins, like Ramanujam and Ballabha and Nimbarka and Chaitanya, these different schools, believe in duality in some way, but they believe in an underlying. All of these schools of Vedanta believe in an underlying unity in some sense. It's maybe not a complete, not an absolute unity, right? Except for Madhva. So, as a matter of fact, the first five systems are impossible without a belief in duality or plurality as being real. Thus, according to the Sankhya, there are two entities, independent and distinct: the pradhana or prakriti. Pradhana is the conglomerate of things before the creation of different elements, right? Prakriti simply means material nature, consisting of the three qualities sattva, rajas, and tamas, which are the prime cause of the material world, and the purushas or souls that are infinite in number. So this is according to Sankhya. The pradhana is eternal matter, indiscrete, indistinguishable, as it is destitute of parts. So it's undistinguishable in different parts. Okay. Inferable from its effects, productive without being itself a product. The soul or Purusha simply means a person. So the soul, the individual soul, is neither produced nor productive, multitudinous, individual, sensitive, eternal, unalterable, immaterial. Besides these two, so we have Prakriti, right? And we have Purusha. Purusha meaning the soul here, or it can also mean God, like that. Could mean the supreme soul, could mean the individual soul, or it could mean both the individual souls and the supreme soul. So we have basically in Sankhya, we've got in Ishvara Sankhya at least, we have Prakriti, Purusha, right? So besides the two, Sankhya teaches 23 other principles. Tatvani simply means categories, right? Principles. Intelligence, buddhi or mahat, egoism, ahankara, the five subtle elements, tanmatras. So there are subtle elements, not to be distinguished with the five gross elements, but there are subtle elements called tanmatras. Tanmatras is a little difficult to explain, so we'll just skip it for now. The five organs of sense, right? Five organs of sensing, right? Seeing, hearing, etc. Right? The five organs of action, the hands, the legs, the whatever, etc. The internal organ, manas, or the mind, right? And the five gross elements, which are bhumir, nalo, bhumir, apa, nala, vayu, akash, right? So we have these earth, water, fire, air, ether. Okay. or space. The Purusha, absolutely inactive, is a witness to the active Prakriti. So Prakriti is evolving as the creation is going on. And he's saying Purusha here is absolutely inactive. For some reason, he's saying that. It is the union of these two that leads to the creation and involves the Purusha in samsara. Purusha meaning the soul is involved in samsara, is born in a particular body. So the one unborn, here he's quoting from Shvetashvatara Upanishad, the one unborn for his enjoyment approaches the one unborn Prakriti, which is red, meaning activity or rajas, passion, white, goodness or sattva, and black, darkness or tama, and produces a manifold and similar offspring. The other unborn abandons her when once she has been enjoyed, right? So this is Shvetashvatara 4.5. So this is very interesting explanation of creation. The non-intelligent pradhana, meaning the conglomerate of material elements before they're separated out and before creation, acts for the good of the soul. The non-intelligent pradhana, that doesn't act, even without any other intelligent superintendent like Ishvara, acts for the good of the soul, just as the non-intelligent milk acts for the growth of the calf. Right, so he's giving an analogy here, like that. So, and just as there takes place a movement in the iron in the proximity of an unmoved magnet, so there takes place a movement in Prakriti in the proximity of the unmoved soul. The union of Prakriti and Purusha is caused by mutual dependence. The lame man mounted on the blind man's back, and the blind man following the path indicated by the lame man, both reach their goal. Though either by himself is helpless. So in the creation affected by Prakriti and Purusha by their union, is the creation affected by Prakriti and Purusha by their union. So this is their idea, the idea. All this time, the Purusha, though essentially udasina, indifferent or passive, comes under the shadow of buddhi, right, intelligence, though not recognizing himself as distinct from it, and suffers from the pain which really belongs to buddhi, but which, owing to its being reflected upon him due to the extreme proximity, is regarded by the Purusha as belonging to himself. And he can throw it off and obtain final bliss only when he gets rid of the error of confounding himself with the Prakriti. So he thinks, because of his getting very close to material nature, like a magnet and a piece of iron, right? He thinks that that he is that material nature, and he can only and that is because he identifies also with the mind and the intelligence, which is telling himself that he is material, the Purusha, the soul, but he can get rid of this when he gives up this error of wrongly thinking that he is material, and that understanding that he is pure spirit. So thus, it is the knowledge of the distinction or duality between Prakriti and Purusha that leads to moksha, right? So it's that's very, very important point there. That's what leads to moksha. So and in the words of Shankaracharya, he says, "Jnanat mokshaha." From knowledge comes liberation, right, or moksha. So what is that knowledge? That knowledge is that the Purusha is separate from Prakriti. The Purusha, or the soul, is separate from material nature, is different from material nature, completely different thing. So Sankhya, the Sankhya system, right, is the exponent of the doctrine of parinama, or modification. Parinama means modification, or in other words, of the Satkaryavada, that regards, Satkaryavada means to speak about, or to a doctrine of Satkarya, of eternal eternal existence, or Satkarya, as regards the relation between cause and effect. The effect always is present in the cause and is only a modification of it without any distinction of essence. So this is how we get duality and underlying unity. There's an underlying unity between what's created and the creation, the creation once it's created and before it's created, like that. So there's an underlying unity, but the effect, because the effect and the cause have the same essence, but the effect is a modified cause, is the cause being modified. So the Sankhya also lays great stress on the efficacy of reasoning. It is by inference or reasoning that acquaintance with things transcending the senses is attained, and we discussed that before. Only by reasoning can we understand something which is beyond our senses, right? It's beyond our senses to know how our wife became pregnant when we were away for a year, or to know whether there's actually a fire on the hill or whether it's a cloud, but we see the smoke or we see the cloud. Like, it's actually beyond our senses, but we infer that because there's smoke, there's fire, because our wife is pregnant and we've been away for a year, she was impregnated by someone else. These are logical conclusions that we come to by reasoning. So the Sankhya allows us to reason or infer, right, things that are transcendental to our senses, that are beyond our senses. And it is only those truths which are neither to be directly perceived nor to be inferred by reasoning that can be deduced by revelation. Okay, so now we're getting to revelation. Okay, so revelation is when he talks about revelation, he's basically here talking about the Vedas. The Vedas the Upanishads are revelation. The rishis or the rishikas, the seers of the Vedas have had this, they've had these revelations of the Vedas, and that revealed knowledge, right, is going to help us, that when we cannot understand, when we can't understand something purely by reasoning, first of all, by direct perception, we can't understand something, then we turn to reasoning. And after reasoning, when we can't understand something, if it's beyond reasoning, then we have to accept revelation, or the Vedas, or the Upanishads. Thus, when the scales are turned the opposite way, as compared with the Vedanta, the revelation comes first and the reasoning second. Okay, so basically what we're doing when we're reading Vedanta is we're looking at the things which are stated in Vedanta, we're accepting them like that, and but we're also applying reasoning. We're applying anumana, logical reasoning, inference to them, to try to accept, to help us accept them. So as regards the yoga, there is nothing more to notice except the admission of an additional principle, the Ishvara, the God. And that's why we were discussing before that in Sankhya, there is also the school of Sankhya that accepts Saishvara Sankhya, which accepts God, like that. So the Ishvara, who is a soul or spirit distinct from the other souls, untouched by affliction, action, fruit, and fancies, or passing thoughts, who of his own will, assuming a body in order to create, originated all secular or Vedic traditions, and who is gracious towards the living beings, scorched as they are by the fire of worldly existence, himself infinite and omniscient, all-knowing. So, according to the atomic system of Vaisheshika and the dialectical system of Nyaya, or logic, soul and matter are quite distinct entities, both equally real. And it is confounding that it is the confounding of the one with the other, right, which causes all the misery of worldly existence. So just when the soul thinks that he is matter, he or associates associates himself with his body, right, that that's the cause of suffering. of misery and worldly existence. The soul is the receptacle of knowledge distinct from body and senses, different from each individual person, omnipresent, eternal, perceived by the mental organ, the mind, and demonstrated by its peculiar attributes, which are knowledge, desire, aversion, pain, pleasure, effort, and effort or volition. The soul, though it animates itself, the soul, though it animates the individual, cannot experience pain or pleasure in relation to itself unless it is associated with the body. Well, that's an interesting idea. Maybe a different type of pleasure he can accept. It is to be noted also that the soul, is as much a substance as earth, water, etc., being a substratum of qualities like them, and hence it is included in the list of the 9 dravyas. Dravyas simply means substances or substances. Besides these individual souls, there are an infinite number, which are of infinite in number, and are all equally omnipresent, always existing. There is a supreme soul, Paramatman, which is one and the seed of eternal knowledge, and is known from valid proof as the maker of all things. The material world is of 4 kinds, according as it is derived from the element earth, water, light, or air. In the gross elements, all the gross elements can be ultimately reduced to atoms, which are themselves incapable of further analysis and hence eternal and atomic in size. It is by the will of the Paramatman that a movement is produced in these atoms, which are thus brought together, and in this way the creation takes place. Freedom from samsara, or absolute negation of all pain, is the highest goal, and this is termed as moksha or liberation. And the only means of attaining it is the right knowledge of the 7 categories according to Kanada, who is the sage who was describing Vaisheshika, the Vaisheshika school, Kanada, or of the 16 according to Gautama, who is a sage who was teaching Nyaya. A man is involved in samsara thus. First, he has false notions such as mistaking the body, etc., which are not the soul for the soul. These lead to faults, that is, the desire for those things which seem agreeable to the soul, and as a dislike for those things which seem disagreeable to it. Though in reality, nothing is either agreeable or disagreeable to the soul. Impelled by these faults, man does things which may be forbidden or may be laudable, may be praiseworthy. Both being, however, forms of activity. Both being, however, being forms of activity, lead to similar blamable or praisable, laudable birth or bodily manifestation. So he does things, and he gets karma from doing those particular things, either good karma or bad karma, punya or papa, we call it. Punya is good karma, and papa is bad karma, but it's reactions from these different activities. They lead to similar blamable or laudable birth or bodily manifestation, which lead in the next life to, even in this life or in the next life, to these different bodily positions coming from the karmas of the previous existence. Now, this series, beginning with false notions and ending with pain, is continually going on and is what is called samsara. Samsara is compared to a wheel. So there's no beginning or end to a wheel. It just keeps going around and round. Or mundane existence, getting on ceaselessly like a water wheel. Right? Like at a mill, an old mill, there would be a wheel that would push water. The water would push the wheel around. So when, however, a man has obtained right knowledge of the categories which enables him to distinguish one thing from another, and the soul from the body in particular, all false notions disappear. The faults thus pass away. With them ceases activity. With activity ceases birth, and with the cessation of birth comes the complete abolition of pain. And this absolute abolition of pain is the final bliss. Okay, so this will be called the so very similar to the idea of nirvana in Buddhism. The nirvana means simply extinguishing. So as long as we have life and we have, we're associated with matter and everything like that, we feel suffering, and the cessation of suffering is called nirvana, right? Which is like extinguishing a candle flame or a lamp flame just by blowing it out. So that's the idea. This is his idea so far of the final bliss of moksha, is the cessation of all pain for a start. He hasn't mentioned about spiritual bliss, but we'll see if he gets into that. As opposed to the parinama, right, and the Satkarya doctrines of the Sankhya's, the Vaisheshikas, and the Nyaya are exponents of the Arambha. Arambha means to start or to continue, right? And Asatkarya doctrines are not eternal, which maintain a creation as absolute and new. Thus, according to them, the effect is absolutely different from the cause, is never present in the cause, but is newly created and stands in invariable concomitance, samanvaya, with it. The same is true about the revelation between the qualified substance and its quality, or the active object and its activity, which cannot be absolutely different according to Sankhya or Vedanta, right? So there's a invariable concomitance, right? There's a similarity between an object and its activity, between a qualified substance and its quality. However, they're not the same thing. A substance and its quality are not the same thing. An object and its activity are not the same thing, but they are connected, right? Thus, a jar is absolutely different from clay, a jug or a jar or a vase, right? Made of a pot, let's say, right? He's saying jar, pot made of clay is absolutely different from clay, though it cannot exist apart from clay, because clay is the basis of the pot. The potter takes the clay and makes the pot out of clay, but the pot is not clay. It's not and it is clay at the same time. So thus, both the Sankhya and Nyaya Vaisheshika systems are essentially dualistic, and we may also say materialistic. They at the same time admit of the eternal existence of matter apart from the intelligent principle, and as quite independent from it. The Purva Mimamsa, the Karmakandis, being essentially ritualistic and practical in character, and concerning itself as it does with the determination of religious duty or dharma, right, and the laying down of the canons of interpretation of sacred texts, it need not detain us here, though the principles of interpretation taught by it, right? So the principles of interpretation, which are there in the Karmakanda school or the Purvamamsa school, are also used in the Uttaramamsa school. Though the principles of interpretation taught by it, that is the relative importance of direct statements, rule, indicatory marks, linga, right, context, prakarana, etc., in determining the sense of a word or a passage are accepted by everybody, by all. The Uttramimamsa, the Vedantin, right, is so called to distinguish it from the Purvamimamsa, the Karmakanda, since it is concerned with the interpretation of portions of revelation, the Vedas, the Upanishads, in other words, relating to knowledge that come after karman, after the idea of karma and actions and ritualistic actions, while the other with that of the previous or purva, old portions of revelation. So the other parts of the Vedas, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, and the Aranyakas deal mostly with the ritualistic activities, the karmas, the karman here. So this system, more popularly known as Vedanta, that is the Uttramimamsa, right, is the only system of philosophy properly so called, which has exercised the greatest influence over Hindu thought, And even at the present day, if it is possible to describe the philosophic thought of Hindus in general by one name, it is Vedanta. So in general, if we talk, Hinduism is a huge thing, which is made of many, many different schools. But in general, if we have to talk about what is the philosophical underlying thought of all Hindus, it is Vedanta. Now, there's some exceptions to that. There are some exceptions to that, but very rare. So it is to be remembered, however, that the name Vedanta does not signify one system only, as is, for instance, the case with the other orthodox systems considered above. So we talked about all these other orthodox and heterodox systems, but Vedanta itself has many different flavors. It comprehends several systems differing from each other essentially in points of metaphysical doctrine, ranging from absolute idealism of Shankara, right, down to the dualism of Madhva, right? At the same time, having some important features which are common and which may be the reason of their being designated by a common name, that is Vedanta, besides the fact of their professing to be based on the Vedanta, or the end of the Vedas, the end part of the Vedas, which is the Upanishads. Of these, we may notice here only the 5 systems which are attributed to Shankara, Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Vallabha, and Madhva, and which are known respectively by the names Kevala Dvaita, absolute monism, Vishishta Dvaita, qualified monism, Dvaita Dvaita, dualism and monism, Shuddha Dvaita, pure monism or purified monism, and Dvaita, or dualism. All of these profess alike to be derived more or less from the same collection of sutras, right? Remember, we have the Vedanta Sutras, also called Brahma Sutras, right? That the Sutrakara, known as Badarayana, also identified as Vedavyasa, right, should have all these in view. It is, however, very probable that the germs of all the Vedanta systems existed long ago as systems proper, attaining to a certain importance in the estimation of people. They may be said to date from the times of the respective philosophers to whom they are generally attributed. Does that make sense? So from this point of view, Shankara's system may be called the oldest, because Shankara was prior to these other philosophers, by general consent. Right, so generally people will not say that Ramanuja's philosophy or other philosophers' philosophy was prior to. However, if you read amongst the Sri Vaishnavas, they'll say, well, Ramanuja's philosophy was based on an older teachers like Dramita, Tarka, Guha. There's Karparidin. There are these older philosophers which are mentioned by Ramanuja, which perhaps were teaching Vishishtadvaita before Ramanuja or even before Shankara, but Shankara's system came along and sort of eclipsed or supplanted all of these other the knowledge of all these other systems in general. So is now placed in the latter half of the 8th century, 788 AD to 820 AD. So this is there's some difference amongst scholars about the exact date of Adi Shankaracharya, but we can take it we can take about the 8th century as a ballpark figure for Shankara. Telang's view, so some scholar called Telang's view, putting Shankara in the 7th century, has been conclusively disproved by Professor Pathak. And let's have a look down here. He's got a footnote here. For these 2 views regarding the date of Shankara, the reader may be referred to JBRAS, which is the Journal of the British Royal Association Asiatic Society, right? Volume 17, page 63, where it says Purva Varma and Shankaracharya, and volume 18, page 88, quote, Dharma, Kirti, and Shankaracharya, page 147, Subandhu and Kumarila, and Bhatrihari and Kumarila. Okay, so these Bhatrihari also, these are all the names of different different sages who different persons who acharyas who had different philosophies and things like that. So we can look up in those places for a discussion of the dates of Shankaracharya. So without going into details, I shall content myself with the following question. Right, the date of the death of Bhartrihari, the Buddhist author of the Vakyapadiya, is fixed by Professor Pathak as 650 AD, and in relation to him, Kumarila is assigned to the first half, and Shankara and Sureshwaracharya. Sureshwaracharya was the disciple of Shankaracharya, who had previously been Mandana Mishra, I believe, was his name when he was a disciple of Kumarila. I couldn't remember it previously. Kumarila had a disciple, Mandana Mishra, who debated with Shankara, was defeated by Shankara, became one of his four main disciples. Shankara had four main disciples: Totaktacharya, Hastamalaka, Padmapada, and Sureshwaracharya. Sureshwaracharya was previously in his Grihastha life called Mandana Mishra, I believe. Anyway, so Sureshwaracharya in the latter half of the 8th century. So we're talking about the in the middle of the 7th century, we've got this Buddhist Acharya Bhartrihari, and then Kumarila comes along. Kumarila is assigned the first half of the 7th century, the 8th century, and then Shankaracharya and Sureshwaracharya, his disciple, in the latter half of the 8th century. So Mr. Telang, however, contends that these last cannot be assigned as to such a late date, and he would place them in the 7th century. Okay, approximately. It may be mentioned, and you can look that up also in the JBRES Centennial Memorial, volume 1905, pages 51 to 52. So anyway, it may be mentioned that Dharma Kirti is identified with the author of Nyaya Bindu. Nyaya Bindu would be a work on Nyaya. Bindu meaning a drop of logic, which is commented upon by Dharmotaracharya, who belonged to the Sautrantika school of Buddhism. Okay, so Buddhism, the original form of Buddhism, and there's many schools today, which are basically divided up into Mahayana and Hinayana, which is also called Theravada. And we also have the Vajrayana, which is the Tibetan Buddhism. So basically, you've got those three schools. And you've got many sub-schools that belong to those different traditions. And we won't go into the details of it now. But then originally, before Buddhism came out from India and spread throughout Asia, in India, there were four original schools, which were the Madhyamaka, the Sautrantika, which he's mentioned here, the Sautrantika, and another couple of schools which we don't have to bother about mentioning here. Okay, so this Dharma Kirti has been assigned. So he's a Buddhist, right? And we should understand that with the rise of Purva Vimamsa, the Karmakanda, and then later Vedanta, Buddhism was driven out of India pretty much. So when we can date the Buddhists, if we can date the Buddhist teachers in India and date the Buddhist schools in India, then we know that they are prior to the rise of Karmakanda, the Purva Mimamsa, and the Uttara Mimamsa of the Vedanta under Shankara. So Kumarila and Bhartrihari and then Shankara later. So okay, so we have this Dharma Kirti is assigned by Professor Pathak to the beginning of the 7th century, and it must be admitted without opposition that he is older than Shankaracharya, as the latter criticizes his views. And this is textual criticism, textual research will show us that if we look at the writings of certain people, they'll refer to the arguments of other people and even maybe name them other people that they're defeating the view of a particular person or accepting the view of a particular person, and obviously that person or they may mention a book by a particular person, and that therefore we can understand that came prior, that preceded that person, and his book and his philosophy doctrines came before that chronologically. So thus Shankaracharya appeared at a time when his presence was urgently required to put a new life into Brahmanism, right, and Hinduism, as well as to counteract the influence of Buddhism, Jainism, and other heterodox systems on the one hand, and the Mimamsakas, right, the Karmakandis on the other hand. The Hinayana, you can read Theravada, right, Buddhism, had already made way for Sanskrit Mahayanism, had already made way for Sanskrit Mahayanism. So Hinayana is considered older than Mahayana. Hinayana, okay, so to be very quick about it, Mahayana is a big vehicle and Hinayana is a small vehicle. So basically, the Buddhism of the Hinayana schools is basically should be, right, theoretically, about the liberation or the extinguishing of the individual, right? Whereas the Mahayana schools are much more interested in the liberation of everybody, like that. So the small vehicle, the big vehicle, small vehicle can take only one person. The big vehicle can take many people, like that. So so we get all the ideas of bodhisattvas and all this sort of thing in the Mahayana schools. So had already made way for the Sanskrit Mahayanism, and against this last, the Mahayana schools, right, controversies were carried on by the school of Nyaya and by the Mimamsakas, especially by Shabhara Swamin and Kumaralabhata. Shabhara Swamin also a Karmakandi, a Purvamamsa Acharya. The latter maintained the efficacy of the sacrificial religion alone, that is Kumaralabhata, and denied it even, Shabhara Swamin and Kumaralabhata, and denied it even to the faith and practices of the Upanishads, whose doctrines, based as it was on the Upanishads, was in danger. When there appeared prominently on the scene Gaudapadacharya, who was the guru of Adi Shankaracharya, and sometime after him, the pupil of his pupil Shankaracharya. Okay, so we have Gaudapadacharya and then Govindapadacharya, let's say. Gaudapadacharya, Govindapadacharya, then Shankaracharya. These propounded the doctrines of illusion or Maya, right? That's why we often call them Mayavadas. But anyway, they have the idea of Adhyasa, that Brahman, the supreme, right, of which everything is Brahman, everything is Brahman. Brahman can be divided up into Ishvara, Chit and Achit, or matter, the souls, and God. And all of these together represent Brahman, or the supreme, in a sense. They have an underlying essential similarity. But what Shankara is saying, Gaudapada and his disciple Govindapada and Shankaracharya, what they're saying is, they're saying that because of illusion, because of ignorance or illusion, agyana or maya, imposed upon this Brahman, right? Then we see those differences. To overthrow this theory was the great object of the remaining four, which he talked about. We can add Chaitanya also, we can say five, but here he doesn't deal with the Chaitanya school. He deals with Nimbarka, Ballabha, and Ramanuja, Nimbarka, Ballabha, and Madhva. So to overthrow this theory was the great object of the remaining four Vedantic schools, which preached bhakti or devotion against karma and jnana, knowledge and works, action, as the means of deliverance, and which insisted on the reality of the world, both intelligent and non-intelligent, basing their arguments on the same Upanishads on which Shankaracharya and his school took their stand. Okay. The doctrine of Shankara, though of great merit from a metaphysical point of view, was rather too elevated and too impersonal for the ordinary people who wanted something more definite and personal. No doubt, Shankara, in order to accommodate such people, admitted of a personal God, right? So even Shankara admits of a personal God, which he calls Saguna Brahman, right? Saguna Brahman, as distinct from Nirguna Brahman. His idea of the ultimate is Nirguna Brahman, that is the supreme without any qualities whatsoever. But he talks about Saguna Brahman as the supreme with qualities, in other words, with a form and qualities. And you can associate it with either, he associates it with the Narayana, but there are some other persons who like to follow him who associate it with Shiva or some other, or Devi, some other of the different devatas. So no doubt Shankara, in order to accommodate such people, admitted a personal God, and popular belief attributes to him the introduction of the worship of the Panchayatana, or it's also called Pancha Upasana. Upasana means worship. Pancha Upasana means 5 types of worship. Panchayata means following five different forms of Brahman, meaning Vishnu, Shiva, Surya, Ganesha, and Devi. And the 5 gods together, so as to displease no one. And so in that Panchayata Puja, what people do is they have a system of worship where they place the 5 in a square with one in the middle. Their favorite form of God is in the middle, and then the other forms they put in the corners of the squares, like that. So there's actually 5 different versions of it, depending on what you put in the middle. If you put Vishnu in the middle, or you put Shiva in the middle, Devi in the middle, Ganesh in the middle. But a god was, after all, of an illusory and second-rate importance in his system. So although he taught worship of God with qualities, but he taught it ultimately to rise above that and to understand that ultimately there were no qualities in the supreme Nirguna Brahman. So hence there arose Ramanuja and other Vaishnava leaders who introduced the cult of a personal God and devotion to him or adoration of him, which gained great favor with the people. Yes, okay. So, yes, some people also arrange, if they have their own different deities, even if they're all deities of Vishnu or whatever, they might arrange them in a square like this. So these preachers of bhakti thought it impossible that Maya, again meaning illusion, otherwise known as agyana or ignorance, and bhakti could go together, as the latter necessarily included love, and as love can have place only if the lover and the beloved are real entities, right? So for example, so you can only have love if you have 2 people. You can't have love if there's only one. If there's only one entity, there can be no love, because there's no object of love. There's no subject of love and no object of love. So there cannot be any love, right? It's also a logical argument to talk about knowledge. You can't have any knowledge unless you have something which is known and something which knows, a knower and a known. Then there can be knowledge. So it's a good point. So hence Ramanuja, Ballabha, and Madhva all direct their efforts to the refutation of the Maya doctrine, and they sometimes go as far as to call Shankara a mere incarnation of the Madhyamika, right? Madhyamika is one of those 4 schools, Madhyamika, Sautrantika, of the original Indian Buddhism, or a disguised Buddha, a disguised Buddhist, right? They go as far as to say that. But to account for bhakti, it is not always necessarily to give up the doctrine of absolute unity and its sequel, the doctrine of Maya. For we see that the santas, the saints of Maharashtra, so we have different saints in Maharashtra, like I'm trying to think of saints in Maharashtra. Gyaneshwara. Anyway, he's going to talk about Gyaneshwara. Okay, so have always taught bhakti and at the same time held the doctrine of Shankara. So you have also some later people like Kabir, Nirguna Bhakti, so bhakti without any qualities. It's very interesting. So there's a type of bhakti that is taught by some, right, to the Supreme without qualities. So they have this idea of following the doctrine of Shankara, but they still have the idea of the sadhana being bhakti or devotion. So that we see from the saints of Maharashtra, they're always taught bhakti and at the same time held the doctrine of Shankara. The well-known commentary of Gyaneshwara about 1290 AD on the Gita is a striking illustration of this fact. We could probably talk about in Bengal. There's a Madhusudana Saraswati in Bengal also like that. And we could there's also some others which are slipping my mind right now. But anyway, and no one could have propounded the doctrine of Maya more vehemently and more successfully than Gyaneshwara, and at the same time, no one could have been more staunch and popular representative of the Bhakti cult. And Gate himself seems to be a Maharashtrian, and so he's very, very aware of the Maharashtrian tradition of bhakti, which is also following Advaita. So, and this fact explains why the influence of Shankara's doctrine still holds great sway in the popular mind, and in spite of the attacks made against it by other Vedanta schools. Of the teachers of the four Vedanta schools, the first in chronological order is Ramanuja, born in Shaka. There's Shaka, and there's some other different systems of dates, right? So the Shaka era, 938, corresponding to 1016 or 1017. We accept it as 1017 AD. Ramanuja in his youth, 1017 AD. Ramanuja in his youth lived in Kanchipuram or Conjeevaram. Conjeevaram is simply a anglicized form of Kanchipuram. Nobody calls it Kanjeevaram anymore, but during the British Raj, they used to say Conjeevaram. So Kanchipuram, and afterwards, when he became a successor of Yamunacharya, he lived at Srirangam near Trichinopalli, right, which is Tiruchirappalli today, where he, or otherwise known as Trichy. So when he did his life's work, he is supposed to have died at the age of 120 in 1137 AD. Next comes Nimbarka, who is supposed to have lived a few years after Ramanuja. Now, some people dispute this and they say Nimbarka came first, prior to Ramanuja, but generally it's accepted that Nimbarka came after Ramanuja. The date of his death is probably 1162 AD. And we can look at, there's a book called Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Other Minor Systems, page 62, and that's written by Bhandarkar. So a Telanga Brahmana from Telangana. Telangana is a state in India, which has just recently become a state. It's Andhra Pradesh. Previously, the Andhra Pradesh area of people who speak Telugu, right, has been broken up into two, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh. So he's a Telangana Brahmin by birth, and thus a southerner, Nimbarka. He, however, lived in Vrindavan near Mathura, and his followers are scattered over the whole of North India and exist in large numbers near Mathura and also in Bengal. So Nimbarkas, they worship Radha Krishna, and they seem to be even it seems very likely that Gaudiya Vaishnavism came out of Nimbarka's influence. Nimbarkas are the closest we get to people Gaudiyas. So Madhva lived in the first, so after Nimbarka, then we have Madhva. Madhva lived in the first 3/4 of the 13th century, 1197 to 1276, and his birthplace is stated to be Kalyanpur in Udupi Taluka means a small county, right, of the district of southern Karnataka, which is also called Dakshina Kannada, section of Karnataka near to the seaside, between Mangalore, just north of Mangalore, in a place called Udupi. The other name for Madhva's birthplace is Pajika Kshetra. So it's a kshetra or a field called Pajika Kshetra. Perhaps the same as the Rajata Pitam of Madhva Vijaya. So there's a book called Madhva Vijaya, also called Sumadhva Vijaya, which is the only biography of Madhva written by one of his disciples called Trivika Panditacharya. Okay, so he's mentioning it here. So the followers of Madhva's doctrine exist in pretty large numbers in the Kannarese districts of the Bombay Presidency. The Bombay Presidency under the British Raj was the area from Bombay going south towards Kerala, right, including modern-day Karnataka state or Mysore state. It's called Kannarese because people speak basically Kannada there. In the state of Mysore and on the western coast from Goa to South Kannada. So there are only a few adherents of this school in North India. Okay, so not so many in North India. Last comes Vallabha, who is supposed to have been born about 1417 AD. He's the son of a Telanga Brahmana, right? Again, from like where Nimbaka came from, Telangana, South India, who lived at the village named Kankarava in the Telugu country. He was born while his parents were on the way to Benares on a pilgrimage. He lived in Vrindavan and at Mathura. Sri Krishna and Gokula figure very prominently in his doctrine. His followers are found in very large numbers in Gujarat and also all over North India. All these four schools alike preach bhakti, whereas which presupposes a personal God and condemn the principle of Maya or illusion with equal vehemence. The chief differences in their doctrines relate to the metaphysical or the properly philosophic part of the doctrine. That is to say, they are with reference to the nature of the relation between the Supreme Spirit, right, God, the individual soul, Jivatman, right, the Paramatman, Jivatman, and inanimate world or matter or jada, right? So we shall next indicate briefly the philosophical connections of these 5 schools of Vedanta, which forms the main subject matter of the present essay.
Om Namo Narayana.